Last episode, I ended on a question and answered it with a number. So what must a structure actually provide? 5 things, and every one was already in episode 3. 4 of them were. The 5th is mine, it has no paper behind it, and I will say so when I reach it. No new evidence airs. Every study has already been spent in this series, though some lines from those same papers air here for the first time. From here I stop describing the problem and start grading answers, and you cannot grade anything without an instrument. And the standing head stands. Learning used to arrive free inside cheap junior work. Then the price of that work fell to almost nothing. I am putting that on AI, and episode 5 named other candidates that have not gone away. So the instrument comes first, and the order is the point. If I write the criteria after choosing the answers, the criteria are just a description of what I already like. The new job spent an episode on the difference between a kill criterion written before a trial and a verdict written after one, and the difference is not rigor. It is that the first one can embarrass you. So the rubric gets published here before a single candidate is examined. 5 rows, each scored 0, 1 or 2. And my own team scores 4. One thing goes on the record first, because the strongest objection to this episode comes from the people whose work it uses. 2 conditions come from Lave and Wenger, who gave us legitimate peripheral participation, and on folio 40 they write that it is not itself an educational form, much less a pedagogical strategy or a teaching technique. It is an analytical viewpoint on learning, a way of understanding learning. On the facing page they hope the perspective will inform educational work, and then say this is very different from attributing a prescriptive value to the concept of legitimate peripheral participation and from proposing ways of implementing or operationalizing it for educational purposes. I am turning that viewpoint into 5 scored rows. That is the operationalizing they refused, and I am doing it anyway, because a rubric that hides its own strongest objection is not an instrument, it is an advert. Condition 1 is legitimacy, and it means the work is real. Their word is about the terms of membership rather than the task, so narrowing it to whether the work itself is real is my move and not theirs. On folio 29 they describe learners who inevitably participate in communities of practitioners, and say the mastery of knowledge and skill requires newcomers to move toward full participation in the socio-cultural practices of a community. The participation is the learning. Take it away and there is nothing left to learn from. Which is the cleanest account I have of the number episode 6 spent an evening on. The operator that carried university brands into boot camps reported a $25.6 million fall in boot camp revenue in a single quarter, driven by a 40% fall in full course equivalent enrollments. Boot camps could sell the syllabus of the work. They could never sell the work. Condition 2 is peripherality, and almost everybody gets it wrong, including me on my first pass. It does not mean easy, and it is not a starter task with the risk sanded off. Lave and Wenger are explicit that there is no place in a community of practice designated the periphery, and, most emphatically, it has no single core or center. On the same folio is the sentence that decides whether the condition helps or harms. As a place in which one moves toward more intensive participation, peripherality is an empowering position. As a place in which one is kept from participating more fully, and they add that this is often legitimate from the broader perspective of society at large, it is a disempowering position. Same structure, opposite sign, and the variable is whether anybody ever moves. So condition 2 is a bounded blast radius with a way out. The bound without the exit is not an apprenticeship, it is a holding pen. The machinery already exists here. The new job sorted work into 3 tiers by blast radius and said the tier belongs to the blast radius, never to the hands the code came out of. That still holds, and it bans a stricter tier for code because of who produced it. Supervision is not a tier. It sits on top of the tier's own floor and never lowers it. What a team decides separately is who may work unsupervised inside each tier, and next episode does that mapping. Condition 3 is contact. Peter Knorr made the argument in 1985 without once using the word apprenticeship. A program is not its text, it is a theory held in the heads of the people who built it, which gives him the bleakest sentence in this series. The death of a program happens when the programmer team possessing its theory is dissolved. For a newcomer, he says, it is insufficient to become familiar with the program text and other documentation. What is required is the opportunity to work in close contact with the programmers who already possess the theory. Documentation is not the transfer mechanism. Proximity is. Which is the most uncomfortable question this series has to ask, because the two things that changed most in a decade are how far apart we sit and how much of the asking now goes to a machine with no theory of the program at all. Condition 4 is designed feedback, and it separates practice from experience. Erickson and his colleagues call these practice activities deliberate practice and distinguish them from other activities, such as playful interaction, paid work, and observation of others. Paid work is in the list of things deliberate practice is not, and their reason is that work demands your best performance, so the cost of a mistake discourages exactly the exploring that would improve you. Separately, on what practice requires, they are blunt. In the absence of adequate feedback, efficient learning is impossible and improvement only minimal even for highly motivated subjects. Last episode put a face on that. The people who generated the code and then asked the assistant to explain it back scored highest. The people who kept handing the errors back for the assistant to fix scored lowest and took longest. But the limit travels with it, that split was observed and not assigned. Access was randomized, usage style was not, so it is a moderator and not a lever. Condition 5 is density, and it is the only one of the 5 that is mine rather than somebody's finding, so it gets no citation and no borrowed authority. You cannot skip the years. You can only make them denser. The old apprenticeship worked partly because it went on a long time, and what a long time buys is repetitions. If you compress it, and everybody is compressing it, the compression has to come out of the gaps and not out of the representatives. That is the row where the number is easiest to get. Count how many times a junior has done the thing you want them to be good at. Not how many months they have been employed. How many times? So, the instrument. 5 rows. Legitimate, peripheral, contact, designed feedback, density. Each scores 0, 1 or 2, and the scale reads the same on every row. 0 means the condition is absent. 1 means it happens by accident, which is to say it depends on who the junior happened to sit next to. 2 means it is designed, and designed has a test. Somebody owns it, it survives that person leaving, and you can point at where it is written down. The middle score is called by accident for a reason. This series began with 1. The apprenticeship nobody designed did work, and it worked by luck, and luck is precisely what stops working when the conditions change. So I graded my own team, on the new hire I have been describing since episode 1. Legitimate. 2. The work is real, it ships, a customer feels it, and that is the one thing we never got wrong. Peripheral. 1. The blast radius is bounded, but the tier system does that by side effect, and nobody has written down what moving out of it looks like. Contact. 1. A tech lead holds the theory and is genuinely available, and that is the entire mechanism, so it sits 1 resignation away from 0. Designed feedback. 0. Not low. 0. Nobody ever designed a feedback loop for that person. Reviews happen, and a review is feedback about a difference, not about formation. Density. 0, for the reason this series exists. The repetitions went into the machine, and episode 5 named the other candidates. For out of 10, and 2 of the 5 rows are empty. Now the limits, and there are 4. 2 of these rows come from an analytical viewpoint whose authors hoped it would inform educational work and refused the prescriptive turn themselves, and no care on my part turns their refusal into their endorsement. The moderator underneath row 4 was observed and not assigned. A score out of 10 invites the behavior it should prevent, which is managing the number, so if you catch yourself arguing your team up from a 1 to a 2, the argument is worth more than the score. And the 4th is the one I can be tested on. I already know the 3 answers I am going to grade with this, and I have tried to write rows that can embarrass them. You get to check, starting next episode. Your exercise is that same grading, on your own team, out of 10, in writing. Under 5 is the ordinary case, which is why the expected score gets published before you sit down. A low number is a reading, not an indictment. The artifact is the 5 conditions rubric, and everything after this episode attaches to it. You will know it worked when the argument in the room is about which row is wrong rather than about the total. And next episode 1 start spending, cheapest first. It is not a program and not a budget. It is redesigning work you already do and already pay for, and the first place to look is the hour you already spend reading somebody else's code.